Ladies and gentlemen, Jon McLeod is the chairman of the UK Corporate Communications and Public Affairs. He's one of the country's most experienced corporate communicators and lobbyists, with a strong track record in regulatory, financial, and legal affairs. Ranked by Total Politics magazine in the top 10 public affairs professionals in the country, he was last month described by The Independent as a, quote, very powerful lobbyist. He went into public affairs 17 years ago after spending 6 years as a financial and legal journalist. Jon was educated at Christ's Hospital School and took an exhibition in Russian and French at King's College, Cambridge. He spent 4 years at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, where he specialized in privatization, local governance finance, and health service reform. After that, he joined the Law Society. He has a very extensive CV, so I won't mention everything in here, but I do want to mention maybe two things just to give you a flavor for the kinds of work that he's doing. Recent lobbying campaigns that he has done include acting for American Airlines, Guardian Media Group, Telegraph Media Group, Associated Newspapers, Trinity Mirror, and BT plc. And just a few examples of litigation clients include NICE, Ernst & Young, Canopus Technologies, Fashion House, Chloé, and many more companies. But just to give you a flavor of really the level of work that he's doing. So we're very much looking forward to his lecture. Let me read to you the lecture title. What does it mean to be a good business in 2012? Trends in Corporate Responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Mr. Jon McLeod. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for that introduction. Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's a pleasure to be making a contribution to this well-timed ICD event. And as Mark said, I've got a background in advising some of the world's largest companies in the management of their reputations. And over the last 20 years, I've witnessed some dramatic changes. And above all, I think what we've all seen is a shift in our expectations at what we see from business and what we expect from there, because companies are no longer there for profit alone. And the pursuit of profit, critical though that is, can no longer be the sole driver of corporate behaviour. So, what makes a good company? That sounds like a simple question, and it's one I'm going to try to answer in 20 minutes. And what I'm going to suggest this afternoon is that the concept of a good company in the early 21st century is in fact as confused as it ever has been. And it's confused at a time when civil society desperately needs business to redouble the contribution that it makes to the communities from which they seek to profit. I'm going to propose that the concept of responsibility to society, when applied to companies, what we call in the company corporate, in the jargon, corporate social responsibility, can no longer be applied as a fig leaf or a veneer to corporate conduct. That won't do. My suggestion is that CSR is not a bolt-on or an appendix to a company report or an afterthought. No, instead, the accountability of business to society must become fully integrated to business operations. A successful company must regard itself as fully there to serve the interests of communities as well as shareholders, of habitats as well as board directors, and of customers and suppliers as much as its own middle managers. So, why does this matter now? Well, I think it's fair to say that the public is probably experiencing a bit of a loss of confidence in the corporate world. Anti-business sentiment is running high. According to the European Commission, the economic crisis and its social consequences have damaged consumer confidence and levels of trust in business. They have focused public attention on the social and ethical performance of business. And in one recent poll about the causes of the financial crisis, 70% blamed corporate greed. Another trust barometer recently found that trust in business fell from 59% to 46% between 2008 and 2011. So the banks are blamed for gambling us into a financial crisis. Greedy executives are now at the sharp end of shareholder revolts, and companies are being prosecuted at home for corrupt acts in foreign jurisdictions. Trust is at a low ebb. And yet, these are the self-same corporations that we rely on for employment, for wealth creation, for our pensions, and for the goods and services that we all consume. So I say that this difficult and tense relationship cannot be healthy. So how do we put it right? Well, let me start by asking you to consider 3 good companies. Ben & Jerry's ice cream, delicious. 2 friendly hippies, one with a beard, selling responsibly sourced ice cream. They're the very model of a good company. In fact, they're so radical that earlier this year, the company came out in support of the anti-capitalist protests that were occupying financial centres across the world. To those who occupy, we stand with you, said their website. So, a radical company with radical values. But hang on, I hear you say, wasn't Ben & Jerry's bought by the corporate giant Unilever in 2000? Yes, it was. And wasn't one of the targets of the Occupy movement the alleged corporate excess of senior executives, including Unilever's boss, Paul Polman? Yes, again. So, a good brand, which is part of a bad company, attacks its own parent as part of its good brand positioning. Confused? You should be. By the way, I'm using inverted commas with my hands a lot here because these values are all subjective and because I think Unilever is a great company. Okay, let's have another. Pret-a-Manger, a hugely popular sandwich chain in the UK. It has a real emphasis on the quality of its food and attacks fast food in doing so. So listen to its website. Pret creates handmade natural food, avoiding the obscure chemicals, additives and preservatives so common to so much of the prepared and fast food on the market today. But hang on a second, I hear you say, wasn't Pret-a-Manger acquired in part by the McDonald's Corporation in 2001? Well, yes it was. And so the epitome of fast food is attacked by a good brand that itself is owned that it itself owns in part. Well, not quite. Actually, in this case, McDonald's bought a third of Pret-a-Manger in 2001, but in 2008, Pret-a-Manger was bought by a private equity firm with a third of the value of the company being retained by the management. In fact, they're so worried about this that they've just launched a PR campaign to explain to people that they're not still owned by McDonald's. So you're more confused because you should be. Okay, let's try innocent drinks. The ultimate funky brand. It's even based at Fruit Towers. Nothing nasty in their drinks and plenty of ethical blurb on their website. We're sure we aren't perfect, but we're trying to do the right thing. What could be more innocent than innocent? Except Innocent was acquired by Coca-Cola in 2010. Yes, Coca-Cola acquired 40% of Innocent on top of the 18% it already owned and already had acquired in 2009. Confused? Well, maybe you shouldn't be, because for my money, 3 examples of the same thing in the same sector constitutes a full-blown trend. And we have to ask ourselves what's happening here. I think it's a mistake to assume that Unilever, McDonald's and Coca-Cola are acquiring these businesses to improve their brand image or even their own wider corporate outlooks. I'd say that these acquisitions all fit into the category of a straight hedge against the market for food and beverages, which in the West at least has taken an ethical turn. So, put simply, if fizzy drinks are out and smoothies are in, Coca-Cola has its insurance policy in place. I don't know whether the darkness has been inspired by Coca-Cola, but anyway, it brings me to my first point, which is that assumptions about corporate behaviour can often be misleading. Ben & Jerry's, Pret-a-Manger and Innocent were all acquired because they were good businesses, not because they buffed up the image of the acquirer. And it's no coincidence that they were all food businesses with an ethical twist. That was a mere reflection of consumer trends in the West at the time. But it would be a mistake for anyone inside or outside those companies to assume that the acquisitions were made as part of an attempted makeover. Hence, the lack of integration between the acquired brand and perceptions of the parent. A fundamental disconnect exists, and one which is likely to cause confusion among all stakeholders. So what about the new brands of today, the brands that have become ubiquitous in all of our lives? Well, we can't enter this space without considering Google. Some would say we can't enter cyberspace without going via Google, or so the company might wish, some would say. Its ubiquity and all-seeing eye is both a tool and an intrusion. There is something both godlike and Orwellian about the search engine's reach into our lives. So how does the company tackle this? Well, it has the slogan, "Don't be evil," at the heart of its corporate ethic. Don't be evil is about doing the right thing, following the law, acting honourably, and treating each other with respect. So reads its website. It's a noble ambition, and probably one that would work well on a university campus on the west coast of America. Don't be evil when you're running the college bar. Don't be evil when you're organising the college sports day. Sort of sounds easy enough. But don't be evil when you're running a multi-billion-dollar business that reaches 1 billion plus people every day is another matter. And it's precisely because Google takes such a relaxed, dare I say, hippie-ish stance on core issues like data protection, copyright protection, competition issues, and so on, that it seems to come unstuck. So telling the European Commission to take a chill pill over its control of search engine optimization and rankings doesn't quite wash. And throwing up your arms in surprise when it comes to light that your Street View camera cars were also collecting data deliberately from private unsecured data networks, that's yours and my router in our homes, has also looked a little unconvincing. And expressing remorse over unannounced changes in data sharing and settings changes has also failed to impress. Yet these are all things that Don't Be Evil Google has done. And let me be clear, and just in case they're watching or listening, which doubtless they are, I haven't got anything against Google. Great product, and one which we all happily use with an implicit trade-off between any loss of privacy as a result of the information that we pour into the search engine each day regarding our interests, in return for what we get out of it. But it would be difficult to deny that the unresolved tension that exists between the enormous utility of the product and the many social and economic questions it throws up is a problem for our society. It's difficult not to draw similar conclusions regarding Facebook, darling of the tech sector until its recent flotation at $38 and subsequent plunge. Yes, those shares are worth 16% less now at $32, which has left its corporate reputation somewhat in tatters. I'm not sure that the 901 million worldwide users of Facebook really cared, unless they were investors, that is. But the fact that certain investment banks were accused of pumping up the valuation shortly ahead of the flotation, just at a time when revenue forecasts for Facebook were being marked down, has called into question Facebook's fresh-faced college boy values. For any company, that is a severe disconnect, and again, one which militates against the proper integration of any approach to CSR. What we have in Google and Facebook is two companies which are pursuing function first and foremost, with values taking a back seat, or at least a secondary position. And they can't really be blamed for that to a degree. These are highly functional companies whose success is entirely embedded in the triumph of their function. Google's algorithm, its black box, is the beating heart of its success as a company. The more it sucks in, the more effective it can be, and the more useful Google will be to users. But we can't presume that that black box can have a soul, or the power functionally to distinguish between what's good and what's bad for society. It's a muscle driven by demand and not by morality. Similarly, Facebook thrives on the power of its connections and the willingness of its members to post seemingly endless quantities of information about themselves on the internet for all to see, but it provides no moral intermediacy, no value system, and it's perhaps for that reason that it's now associated with criminal behavior, through no fault of Facebook's, and not without Facebook attempting to do something about it. This brings me to my second point, which is that a company focused solely on function rather than how it functions is likely to face a disconnect between how it wishes to be perceived and the true perceptions that surround it. It's not enough for the corporate entity simply to discharge its business functions. It needs to do so in a way which takes a 360-degree perspective on the impact of its conduct on all of the constituencies that surround it. Of course, some will say that brand alone can carry a company a long way, overcoming dissent or criticism by the force of what it carries with it. Great brand plus great product, consumer brand theoreticians argue, and the rest will take care of itself. Take the Virgin brand, for example. It's a sort of super franchise led by the British entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson. It actually began its days as a record label in the 1970s that made its money from Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and later released the Sex Pistols, Britain's best-loved punk band, who recorded Anarchy in the UK. Since then, it's built its brand reputation on the shortcomings of others. Its position has been one of challenge to the establishment, a little bit of punk, if you like. So Virgin Atlantic was launched in 1984 to take on the then might of British Airways, and it was a corporate conflict that at its height led to accusations of airline drinks being spiked with broken glass and more besides. Virgin thrived on the controversy and also delivered a great product. Virgin later took on a company called Camelot, which still runs the UK National Lottery. Again, there were accusations of skullduggery against Virgin's opponents. And even though Sir Richard did not win the business, the Virgin myth of David versus Goliath was built up further. Virgin Trains was perhaps the most counterintuitive play of all, seeking to overturn the almightily awful reputation of British Rail by securing a franchise to run the London to Manchester West Coast Main Line. New trains and funky onboard shops were commissioned to set the tone. And Virgin Trains unfortunately did struggle for some time to burnish its reputation on the rattling iron of the British Rail network, and the brand almost risked going into reverse. But it's fair to say that it has provided something a little bit different to the normally awful passenger experience. Virgin Media was launched in 2007 against the might of Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation and Sky broadcasting empire. And again, there were high-profile conflicts of values, with Virgin seeking to position itself as the white knight for the pay TV, broadband and telephony sectors. And now we see the launch of Virgin Money as a bank scooping up the publicly owned remains of the distressed former mutual savings bank Northern Rock, a rebrand of the financial services sector itself, seeking to wash away the ignominy of the 2007 banking collapse. Perhaps the launch that has caught the imagination most in recent years has been the ultimate brand extension, Virgin Galactic. I'm not joking, this is Sir Richard's plan to offer any of us who have $200,000 to spare to take a trip into space. The brand, it seems, is indestructible, rather like Star Trek's Starship Enterprise, boldly going where no brand has gone before. Except even Virgin, for all its emphasis on great products, its anti-establishment iconoclasm and its bearded optimism has been brought back down to earth just last week. Probably not with a bang, but by no less a figure than the Dalai Lama. Quite why he should be taking an interest in Virgin Galactic, I'm not quite sure, but the Dalai Lama took time out last week to criticize Virgin Galactic in terms which are relevant to our topic today. Sharing a stage with former Virgin Galactic executives in Leeds, he said, "You can do more about ecology. You must not take vacations to Africa, the North Pole, the South Pole, or the Moon, spending millions of dollars. It is a waste." That's a pretty firm rebuke for a business model which is entirely based around holidays in space. And I guess the point about Virgin is this: a strong, iconoclastic brand can make real headway in multiple sectors, even if it sometimes struggles to get the product right. But at the same time, no corporate, however popular, can be immune from the criticism that its products simply do not stand up to scrutiny from a social and environmental perspective. Or to put it another way, Virgin, for all its edginess, can't make holidays in space popular and ethical at the same time. And so, yet again, we have a disconnect, a brand witnessing a disconnect from its wish to be seen as good. So I asked earlier, how do we fix this? And for my money, the answer has to lie in changing the way in which companies account for their conduct, rather like we heard just now. And there are 7 ways that they might do this: financially, fiscally, in terms of corporate behavior, environmentally, in terms of their supply chain, in terms of consumers, and finally in terms of communities and society at large. Financially, we've seen important changes in the strictures surrounding ways in which the reporting of financial performance is conducted, driven by the Enron collapse and the introduction of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. Companies must be honest about their balance sheets. Investors must be told promptly when circumstances change, especially when they deteriorate. No one should benefit from access to privileged inside information. This new climate is beginning to bite, as we've seen with recent high-profile convictions, including that of the former head of the global management consultancy McKinsey & Co., Rajat Gupta. He is appealing against his conviction. Despite this, fiscally, in terms of the tax affairs of companies, we still see a wide range of variation in conduct, with many companies using exotic or offshore arrangements to limit their tax burden. It's a criticism that has been made of Greek ship owners, who I know are popular in Berlin. The country's estimated 762 vessel owners pay no tax on international earnings brought into Greece under rules incorporated into the country's constitution since 1967. The radical Syriza party even campaigned on a platform to abolish this tax break in the recent election. But they're not the only ones. Vodafone, the significant listed mobile phone operator, has repeatedly been criticised for using offshore vehicles to limit its tax bill in the UK. The retail magnate Sir Philip Green, owner of Topshop, BHS and Miss Selfridge, has himself come under fire for his tax arrangements, leading stores to be occupied by protest groups. So even if reporting, So even if the reporting environment for public companies is strict, there are still concerns over the ways in which private companies and others can use tax-efficient vehicles to limit their contributions to the badly stretched tax coffers of national governments, who are struggling to fund crucial public services. It doesn't really need to be explained why this is a bad idea in the current circumstances. My third perspective is corporate behaviour. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the UK and similar legislation in other countries, for example the UK's Bribery Act, have put into focus the need for global companies to put their conduct under the microscope worldwide. Companies' employees or their agents could trigger a corporate prosecution in their home jurisdiction if they are found to have made unlawful payments overseas, and a number of reputable brands have already been prosecuted for those reasons. Corporate behaviour also extends to the treatment of the workforce, not least the recognition of the basic norms of labour rights, the right to work safely, and the right to a living wage. Fourthly, we've seen for some time moves to secure the greening of business, as the realisation has dawned that both in terms of carbon emissions and in terms of the consumption of resources, the impact on habitats and so on, unbridled business is going to spell disaster for the planet, and many companies are taking their own initiatives in this regard, while others are responding to national and pan-national legislative and regulatory initiatives. The fifth area is the supply chain, where all businesses, and in particular manufacturers, rely on strong supplier relationships. However, one of the issues that has been brought to the fore in recent years is the need for a fair distribution of returns along the supply chain. For example, in the food industry, it's true whether we're talking about cocoa, tea or coffee sourced in the developing world, or milk, wheat or beef sourced from our home countries. Fair trade has become a near universal term. Sixth is the treatment of consumers. The politics of consumerism emerged in the West in the 1970s, as did flared trousers, as those with the spending power began to exert that power by giving vent to the expectation of fair treatment. This may seem self-evident to many of us now, but in the fast-growing economies of the East and of Latin America, the burgeoning middle class will also begin to make these pressures felt. Fair treatment for consumers is a norm and will be increasingly demanded as such as prosperity reaches new parts of the world. Finally, and by no means least, businesses are now required to be accountable to the communities in which they are located and to society at large. This goes way beyond simply being good neighbours. This is about a new understanding of the role of a company in society. What does a company give back? How does it reinforce and strengthen communities? What value and values does it bring to the citizens of the host territory? These are all questions which, in my view, must be answered as a matter of course in the conduct of business. Now, not all of those 7 behaviours have the force of law, and of course the temptation is, when times are hard and competition is fierce, to race to the bottom and to adhere to the lowest common denominator. However, it seems to me that a modern and successful global company will seek to integrate these 7 accountabilities: financial, fiscal, behavioral, environmental, supply chain, consumer, and community into a single strategy informing all aspects of their operations. So in conclusion, how do we make this happen? It's easier said than done. Regulation in the area of CSR tends to be light touch at best, and the whole area tends to get relegated when we are facing what are considered to be more pressing matters, such as global financial meltdown. That's why it was heartening to see the European Commission bring forward its recent renewed strategy for corporate social responsibility, which it published last October. The Commission communication came in response to calls for action from the Parliament and the Council of Ministers for policies to be beefed up in this area. And what's striking is the extent to which the promotion of such policies is now seen as part of the solution to our current woes. It says, helping to mitigate the social effects of the current economic crisis, including job losses, is part of the social responsibility of enterprises. CSR offers a set of values on which to build a more cohesive society and on which to base the transition to a sustainable economic system. Of course, this isn't quite post-capitalist thinking, but it is a sign of the growing institutional inclination to see CSR as part of the path ahead for developed economies, where business regulation has to date, in the eyes of some, been too lax. We can see this too in the emergence of recognised principles and guidelines of particular relevance to large companies, such as the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact, the ISO 26000 guidance standard on social responsibility, the ILO tripartite declaration on principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy, and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. This mouthful of conventions is a clear sign of the rising tide of expectation regarding the conduct of businesses in the wider societal sphere. It is also reflected in the European Commission's own plans to up the ante on CSR, for example, by embedding judgments on CSR and company performance on CSR in regulatory and procurement decision-making. But for my money, the real difference will be made when expectations about CSR are made fully part of the company law framework that govern the conduct of companies worldwide. And if that means slow and painful engagement with the World Trade Organization, then so be it. At a time when we see new economic relationships being forged between China and sub-Saharan Africa, and a whole range of other economies are coming and beginning to exert themselves on the global stage, then the opportunity surely is there to make CSR a truly global phenomenon, backed up by the full force of the law. Until such a time, we can expect the sort of fragmentation I spoke about earlier. I'd like to thank you all for listening so patiently and generously, and I look forward to continuing our discussions later on. Thank you. Thank you for the end.